Good evening, everyone. I'm Avery Willis-Hoffman. I'm the program director here at the Armory, and I'm so happy to welcome you here tonight. We have a fantastic lineup of wonderful speakers with us. This is part of our Interrogations of Form, which is a conversation series we do across the year. And tonight, I'm sure, is going to be absolutely fantastic. I thought I'd start, actually, if you don't mind, by reading a poem by Ingrid Jonker, who is her life and work is inspiration for this piece. And so I thought maybe we'd just set the mood with a poem. To stow myself away like a secret, in a sleep of lambs and of cuttings, to stow myself away in the salute of a great ship, to stow away in the violence of a simple memory, in your drowned hands, to stow myself away in my word. So that's Ingrid Jonker, South African poet. So we're so pleased, and please join me in welcoming our wonderful panel tonight. We have Alexandra Gardner, who's a composer, who's going to be our moderator. And we have the amazing Michel van der Aa, who's a composer and a director, and really the genius behind this piece, and Miah Persson, I hope I got that right, who is the soprano and star of this piece. She's going to be with us just for a few minutes. She has to go and prepare for the show, of course. So please welcome them.
Welcome to the Armory. Can everybody hear okay? Good? Good. You are in for a treat tonight. This talk will be fun and the show will be fabulous. So, in a past life, I was one of the 3 editors for the new music magazine, New Music Box, which is part of New Music USA. So I spent several years asking composers and musicians questions about everything all the time. And so we will do that today. One thing that I wanted to talk to both of you about is what it's like. This is the, 4th or 5th reinvention of Blank Out in different spaces. So maybe, or 5th or 6th.
Or 7th? Yeah.
It's happened several times. So what I wanted to ask is, what is it like to reinvent this piece in a different space like the Armory?
Well, the previous spaces were all kind of similar. Well, we did it in the shopping mall in Beijing, in the Beijing festival. That was a bit of a challenge. But aside of that, it was all more traditional theaters. And when I visited this place for the first time in November on a technical visit, I was amazed by its beauty. I think it's such a striking venue. But I found it to have a very wonderful combination of being big and vast, but also have an intimacy at the same time. I think it has to do with the arcs of the ceiling. It doesn't feel, it still feels like a human scale, if you know what I mean.
I think it becomes magical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the first things we decided to do is turn our staging around and play sideways in the space. So we can use the whole width of the space to extend our stage. So there are moments in the piece which are very intimate, and there are moments where it really opens up, and you feel the whole length of the space really.
I know that you, in the piece, you play a lot with juxtaposition like that, things that are larger than life and smaller than life, and the connections made between them, both through the technology and in person. So this is a good spot for that. Miah, so in this work, you have a lot to do.
Yes, I do.
A lot of things to do. So
Yeah.
Miah is the one live person on stage, and there's a lot going on. So what I wanted to ask first is, what is it like to do your role with a disembodied character on film?
Well, I have to say, since I've never done anything remotely like this before in my life, so just to be introduced to all the technique and everything was just like, wow, amazing. And of course, I mean, it took a lot of rehearsal to make everything work and everything. But it is really fascinating. It is just a new way of creating an opera. I think it's really, really fascinating and amazing.
I have to say that for a performer, the music is not very easy, and also Miah, she's a stage. She has to move everything on stage. She has to be the camera operator. She has to. There's quite a few responsibilities other than singing.
Yeah, I mean, when I got the music, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be very hard. And then when I came to rehearsals, we added on, and also you're actually doing the camera here, and then you're dancing, and then you're doing. And I was just like, oh, what have I done? But yeah, it took some time, but now it's there. That's good.
How much did you and Roderick, the baritone, did you rehearse in person together during the creation of the piece?
No.
No, not at all.
Well, I mean, when I started rehearsing, that was in 2016 in January. Roddy was already recorded, beautifully recorded on 3D, always singing perfectly. You know, I was struggling, and then also we had this wonderful choir. Also pre-recorded, and all the music was also pre-recorded. So for me to, first of all, fit in everything that's already been pre-recorded, because normally you work with an orchestra and with a conductor, and then you have the time to actually say, like, but this is how I feel it, and you modify the tempis and everything after how we do it on stage. But this was already, everything was already there. So that was a challenge. But now I have to say, within these boundaries, now I have a freedom which is really amazing, because I have to say, if someone would have told me that in January 2016, that you will feel like this doing this piece, I would have said no way. But it is, now you have within the given set, so to say, there is lots of flexibility.
Yeah.
So maybe interesting to point out that during the making process, I mean, we allowed ourselves to make quite a few rather big changes, still weeks before the premiere. Not only in the staging, but also in the music. I would go back home and bring a fresh soundtrack the next day for Miah to sort of hear for the first time and sing it. And still here.
Can I add, the day before I left, when I was still home in the UK, I just got a text from Michel saying, and this is the new soundtrack for that scene. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So a new soundtrack just before I was leaving. Fantastic. All surprises.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to ask where is the point of a lot of experimentation, but it sounds like that happened throughout the creative process, just sort of on the fly.
But I think I can just imagine how it would be like in Mozart's time. He would write a completely new aria for the night show because the soprano wanted to do something. So, I mean, of course, this is how it is to be a composer. You can, it's your piece.
Now, what was really interesting in this experience is that we didn't have an orchestra to deal with, so we could literally, I could at home change things, and with your enormous flexibility, we actually could, we molded the piece, we sculpted the piece towards the premiere, and even after that, there have been many sort of reincarnations of the piece, and it's quite different now what you hear tonight from the premiere.
Yeah.
And how this is for both of you, how do you account for a breathing room when there's so much pre-recorded material? Breathing room for you. I mean, there are times you can tell when you probably have some wiggle room to take a little bit more time doing this or that action, but a lot of times there's film going on behind you, there's electronic music playing, like there's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. So how does that work? Well,
to be honest, when I go on stage, I'm focusing all the way to the end. Because if I start, thinking about something else, or if I, notice something in the audience, it's gone. I have to stay completely focused throughout. And of course, the opening night was more panicky, like all these things. So
Panic is good in this opera.
yeah, it is actually, and I still have to. There is a degree of panic every night, but now it's it's under control, so to say. It's yeah. So yeah,
Well, it seems like if you do it enough, and it
well, of course,
becomes muscle memory a bit. And,
yeah. And as I said, now there's breathing space and space for me and for my personality, my musicality to get in, also.
And there's no conductor, right? There's no
conductor. There's no orchestra. It's
no secret conductor in the back that we couldn't see. That's great. So, Michel, I noticed that in all of your operatic works, you seem very drawn to themes that are sort of archetypal and mysterious, like, for instance, in Blank Out, the relationship between mother and child, or what happens to us when we die, and also psychological themes, multiple personalities, things like that. So, and then you transform these ideas into something that is very, very personal and human and relatable. And I really love that you have the ability to take a sort of big picture, bird's eye view of topics like this and sort of make them into human personal things that are very moving. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of the process of making that work.
Yeah, on paper it might look like a very technical opera, but in the end, I'm very pleased that if an audience walks out, nobody talks about technology. Everybody talks about, the experience that they're moved and about what they just saw. And this is the biggest compliment, I think, for both of us, because it's a very human story. It's a truly personal human story and on a human scale. And all the technology is there in service of the libretto, of the idea of the music. And it's something which we have around us every day on our smartphones, on our, it's a very visual, technical culture. And for me, it would feel very artificial not to allow that on stage. It's just part of our language, part of our DNA.
Okay.
I need to go now.
Toi.
Thank you, Miah. Just you and me.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, what shall we do? So I'm very interested in the process of composing a work like this with so much technology, and I could wonder if you could talk about your creative process. For instance, how do the music and the film sort of work together? Obviously, you probably don't do one and then the other. Maybe they go step by step. Or can you talk about that?
Yeah, I often make them in parallel. So when I'm composing, I think about the music, obviously, but also about what is this person doing now on stage, and is there film, and in what way does the film relate to the stage and to the music? So for each moment in the piece, I can kind of determine how these three layers extend each other and relate to each other. So it's already, and I can be very practical about it. So if the film is sort of the lead storytelling element, then I can sort of set the music slightly more on a back seat and the staging, if you like. And sometimes it's only about the music, and then there should nothing visual really happen. And so I can determine for each moment in the opera how I want to shift around these perspectives and this play of changing perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Everything fits together really tightly. Like a good film that's just a film. Is really satisfying when all the elements are sort of tied up at the end, and you definitely do that. And I really like that there are very small things that travel through the opera, like stones, a leaf, something like they appear in different places and have different proportions, again, juxtaposing things that are larger than life and not. Do you have those in mind early on in the process, or do they kind of emerge as you go, that there are going to be elements like that sort of travel through?
Yeah, the Stones were there from the beginning, because they're in the opening scene. You'll hear that they're a very big, important element in the narrative. And also, I love the sound of stones, pebbles, bouncing against each other. So also in the soundtrack, they are an important sort of element. And the leaves came in. The idea for the leaves came in later, and but they're very related to the Stones. And often I'm also a huge fan of sort of low-tech things. So there's a tape recorder, an old school, reel-to-reel tape recorder, almost as a way to visualize memory, and how to recover memory, and also how to rewind and forward through time. So it's a very simple theatrical tool that I use to let us know that we're scrolling through time.
Mm-hmm. There's also a fair amount of analog electronic music in there, I would say. I think if you follow Michel on Instagram, those of you who do that sort of thing, you can see Modular Synthesis fun videos.
Yeah, it's basically these are the synthesizers that were used in the 60s and 70s by Stockhausen and all the old famous composers. And that I grew up as a digital native. I made all my sounds on the computer, and I was I'm quite fluent in it. But I got a little bit bored by the interface of the computer and by mousing around in fake plugins, and I really wanted to have a tactile relationship with sound creation again. So I bought one module, and as is often the case, it doesn't stop with one module.
It's an expensive habit.
So the doorbell rings, and my wife is like, "Yes, there's another module for you," and arriving. And so there's a wall, and then I need to break out the ceiling and build another area to the house. So it became quite big and addictive. Yeah.
Yeah. Regarding the 3D film.
Sorry, there's one more thing I'd like to say about that. I mean, the reason that I use these analog sounds in Blankout is that the opera takes place in 1976, and I wanted to use, as it were, period instruments from that time, so period analog instruments. So all the modular synth that I used were existing in that time, or the principle of them were existing in this time. So they have this sort of warm, slightly imperfect quality to them, and they blend really well with the choir. The Dutch Nederlands Kamerkoor, the Dutch chamber choir, is an important sounding element in the piece, and somehow I really fell in love with the combination of analog synths, choir, stone sounds, and so there's very little material in a way, very little sound source material, but they all somehow made sense to me to combine.
Yeah, did you consider using any instruments other than choir at any point, or it just sort of came out that way to be?
Actually, choir, I when I first had the idea for the opera, I didn't think about the choir at all. I wanted to make a purely electronic opera with one person on stage. So it's very sparse and very focused. But then, on the way, while creating it, I was missing something. I was missing an extra human element, also a sort of almost a zoom out of the one voice, if you know what I mean. So the choir sound kind of gives us a larger world, an outside world, sounding world. It's difficult for me to explain, but it was an element that was missing and somehow complemented it. Yeah.
Great, yeah. So the 3D film, it's interesting because a composer writing an opera normally has, a gigantic repertoire to refer to should they need an idea of how this or that thing is going to work. But with 3D film, you got nothing. It's a kind of a new concept, and so there's no opera repertoire that includes that. Is that really freeing, or was it?
Well, I mean, I use film in my work because I do things with the film I can't do with my music. So I want, and it sort of grew very gradually with 2D film, and I made a few operas with just 2D film, but they're they're sort of, they give me a different way of storytelling. And the 3D film I did for the first time in Sunken Garden, an opera I did in 2013 in London. It was kind of called for by the libretto. It's in the DNA of the libretto, which was also the case in Blackout. I needed to find this almost this physical volume in film with what I could extend the stage with, if you know what I mean. So I can really use, with 3D film, you can really extend the stage and have Roderick Williams, the baritone, also inhibit the space of Miah. He can come visually in front of the screen next to Miah. They'll dance together even in this opera. So they really with 2D film it would always stay 2 layers, and now it blends much more.
And you did all the film editing yourself, yeah? Yeah, and all the sound editing, and all the, pretty much everything.
No, not everything. We, a
lot.
There was a great dramaturg, Sophie Motley. She helped a lot with the text and the libretto, and she was there in the whole process. And it was a great bouncing board for me. And lighting designer Florian Gansenvoort. And so we have a small but very capable technical team that are a little bit more than a technical team. They really, we have a very open dialogue about what's happening in the rehearsal process. So I guess the danger of doing it all yourself is that there's no, I mean, it's all in my head, and there's no real world sort of verification and testing, and they provide that to me. They ask me the difficult questions, or they say, Michel, this is all, sounds great, but I don't think it's going to work, and then I have to defend or explain why I think it would work. So there's a dialogue going on then, which I think is very important, and in a creation process.
Were there any times during working out the piece where you experimented and things just they either worked much better than you expected, or things that you had to sort of toss that seemed like a good idea, but they were
usually they work less good than you expect them to work? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and with Sunken Garden, we already had the experience of the 3D film, so we already threw out a lot of ideas that really didn't work. And so with Blackout, I was a little bit more prepared. But even so, I mean, in the edit, I mean, again, the benefit of having such a small team and cast is that we could really experiment and move quite quickly and make rather large decisions very late in the process. Which was a real freeing experience to me. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you're stuck with this score, and there's a director, and there's very little wiggle room to fix things, and now we could really decide, okay, we have to make this 5 minutes shorter, or have to throw it out altogether and come up with something else.
Mm-hmm. So given that you had that you did so much in the process, how does it feel when the performances are actually happening and you have to let it all?
It's terrible. It's terrible.
It's terrifying, right?
Yeah, I'm all cramped up in the audience as well, especially on the premiere. Tonight will be fine, but it's terrible. I'm a super control freak, and it's not. It's hard.
Well, it sounds like you've put together a team that you can trust. So.
Yeah. No, it's not that I don't trust them. I just, when something happens, I want to run back and what's happening? How can we fix it? But they all know how to fix it.
Was there anything else that really surprised you during the process of either mounting the work here or just the general sort of creation of the work? Unexpected things?
I think what I wanted to do with this piece is keep it relatively simple. Although all this technology makes it sound like it's very difficult, but I wanted to look seamless and to look focused and to really concentrate on this one person or these two persons and their story. I try to compose slightly more sparsely than I usually would do, and also the staging is rather simple, really. And I think that's what I learned from this piece. That it can still be interesting, or still somehow have a dramaturgical arc if you do it like that. So to dare to be less, to dare to really be focused and economical about the material.
I noticed that it seems like, I could totally be wrong about this, that your works for opera have progressively become more and more minimal in terms of live human participation. So there's, there were chamber orchestras, smaller chamber orchestra, no chamber orchestra at all, chorus on tape. What?
The previous one, Sunken Garden, there's an orchestra and there's 6 singers and 5 actors. So it was a rather big one. But definitely between Sunken Garden and this one, there's a big difference in that respect. Yeah. Although Sunken Garden, I also revised very heavily, and we're doing that at Dallas Opera in March actually. So that's also a new incarnation of the piece.
Great. So then the sort of very small cast of this was you just wanted it for this particular story.
Yeah.
There was not a.
No, I would. I don't. I saw on.
You would do it with a live choir, for instance.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the idea. But I saw on my Twitter feed last week that they had this, a robot conductor, and they were testing with a robot conductor, and I think that's very boring. And why would you? I'm interested in adding technology, but not replacing human beings, but just. Surrounding human beings with technology like we do in our daily lives.
Can you talk about what you hope the audience will come away with from this, or are we not talking about that?
That's difficult because I mean, for me, I think. Opera or art in general is good when it's not when. Let me start differently. I'd like to sort of push an audience towards what I wanted to do with the piece, but not push them all the way. So people have to take the last steps themselves, and I think that's a very important thing because everybody will hear his or her own truth in the piece or see that, and this is what makes you involved, and this is what enables you to put your own life and experience in relationship to the piece. So you have to be concrete, but not too concrete. You can be dreamlike, but not too dreamlike, because then it's something that nobody cares about anymore. So that's always something that I think about a lot. Is how can I give so much information, or like I said, bring people to the point that they can take the last few steps themselves. That it sort of makes sense to their personal experience rather than it's something that I feel they should get out of it. So dare to be non-specific, not always too specific, and dare not to give every answer to every question.
Yeah, I think you do that really successfully with the work. It's it's very personal, but each person can sort of inject their own experience onto the work. What else?
Maybe questions?
Yeah, is anybody? Oh, we have a question. Yes.
How long you rehearsed, and did you rehearse in the theater so that the actor could be with the film, or did you do that in a rehearsal hall? Did you project it full scale?
I think we rehearsed for about 6 weeks, and we had indeed the 3D projection in the space, and I could bring in new edits every day to change things in the editing of the film, and yet we had to do it like that, otherwise we would have found out very late if things worked or not. And a simple thing like projecting a human being on a one-to-one scale on a screen is so much more complicated in 3D, because you also have to deal with the volume of the film. So if you put a real a live singer next to a pre-recorded person, it's very complicated things of scales, and there's a risk of dwarfing the other person, and so that's something we really had to try and test a lot of times and tweak.
Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Thank you. I will get them.
They're not 3D glasses, so you don't.
Yeah, they're. Yes, of course.
Miah mentioned that she found a lot of freedom within the space you created. I know that she's not here, but what's your idea? Where a human being can find the freedom in a so beautifully created but still caged with so many restrictions, which gives us a lot of technology.
The question is, how did Miah find the space within this piece that has so much technology in it to breathe it? Is that?
So where do you believe a human being can find the freedom within the cage that technology is creating?
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yes. How can human beings find freedom?
It's a huge topic, I think,
Oh,
in
yeah,
our
that's big.
everyday life. If I walk on the streets here, everybody's sort of glued to their iPhones and or waiting in line for the iPhone 8 at the Apple Store. So we've become very dependent on it and become such an important anchor in our lives. And I think there's a counter movement, of course, going on. People are sort of, removing phones from high schools, and I think we're training our kids how to deal with them, sensibly. I think there's always a wave of technology, and then there's, it's like full on, and then we start thinking, oh, how are we going to give that a proper place in our lives? And so we're sort of embedded in it, and then we start thinking about what are the downsides of it and how, So I'm slightly optimistic about that. I think we, in the end, our senses will prevail and will, but also with artificial intelligence, I think, which is one of the biggest threats in our time, or can be one of the biggest threats in our time. It's good that people deal with that right now and think about that right now. And these are very interesting topics for me, and also topics that end up in my pieces somehow, literally or less literally. So for me to have a singer deal with a more electronic or digital surroundings, it gives me gives it a very interesting challenge and makes it very human in a way, in reference to each other. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that the technology of this work, which is very complicated, is completely in service of the story.
Yeah.
There's really nothing superfluous, and I think that will probably be your experience as well. There's a point to everything, and I think the more work that people experience that is like that, where technology for the forces of good, is
also
important.
yeah, we had high school kids coming to the show, and they don't care about the technology. They have that every day on their phones and their PlayStation 4s, I think we're at. So they don't question the technology or the 3D element of the opera. They just straightly go into the subject and into the theme. So I think that's also interesting. For them, it means something different than it does for my generation, or for
Do we have
it's much more seamless in their lives.
another question? Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for all of this and for being so open about it. It's really very, very nourishing. You spoke about bringing new material in, new technical material into the editing and so on during rehearsal. Is there any important element in the piece that is only there because you were working with Miah that would be unimaginable if you'd been working with a different performer?
That's a very good question. Yes, I think definitely musically, because I also shaped and tweaked the music by rehearsing it with her, and I found some of the moments actually I could go a lot further than I thought I would go in terms of virtuosity, in terms of how well she integrated with the set technology and with the things that happen on the screen. And I think this is one of the main things that were added in the rehearsal period. That a certain while doing it, she gave me ideas about what. Sometimes we were trying something and that didn't really work out, but something more beautiful came out of it because of something she did, or because something she sort of showed me from her side of the of the line. And I have to say, she was an amazing collaborator, always super open-minded, never frustrated, although there was enough reason to be frustrated. We had so much technology failing, and she was really the dream collaborator in this. And so definitely I feel like, yeah, she played a huge part in the creation. Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk more about the inspiration for the story and your personal connection to it.
Yeah, I've been reading Ingrid Jonker for a long time, and I have her works in my book on my shelves for a long time. And I have this one shelf where I put things that I'd love to use in my work at one day, and it was already on there for a long time. And when I started thinking about the idea of the opera, I knew I wanted to do an opera about I don't know if I should tell you actually. I won't go into details about the storyline too much, but the idea I had for the story fitted so much with the life of Ingrid Jonker. And one thing I decided quite early on is I wanted to have sort of more concrete text and language that carried the narrative arc of the piece, and I wanted to have some poetry that's sort of more of the heart of the piece and sort of demands to be sung. And her poems really fitted so well in this story. And added to that, her life story is so connected to some of the narrative elements of our protagonist. It sort of fell into place like that. And she was, in Holland, she's quite a famous poet. She was translated quite early on because of the Afrikaans being very close to Dutch. So we had Antje Krog, who translated, I can't remember, I think in the 70s even. So it's available to us, and she was of great importance to South African life and politics and anti-apartheid and feminism. And Nelson Mandela read one of her poems on his first day in Congress. Yeah, I really sort of think she was an amazing person and wrote amazing work and somehow fitted to everything.
So you took snippets from the poetry, but there's parts of the libretto that are your writing as well.
Yeah, but there are whole poems, so I never cut the poems, but and there are sort of biographical elements of her life that are in the opera, but I added elements of my own, basically. So it's not a pure biographical opera.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question. That you've had your hand up several times in the back. Yes, you. Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about your musical influences and visual influences, kind of growing up and getting onto this path?
Yep. My roots are my mom and dad had a youth opera company in the village where we lived in the north of the country, and this is my first. The first time I got into touch with music. Every year we did a children's opera, and my sister and I were singing in it. And first I was, we were doing an opera from Tyrol, I think, and I was one of the mountain ghosts together with my sister in very hot, sweaty suits, and we could only sing the choirs. But gradually we could sing some solos, and I saw that. The magic of theater was shown to me, that you can paint a mountain on a backdrop and suddenly with the right light you're in the mountains. And I really remember as a young kid that sort of opened my eyes to how amazing theater is and how easy it is to bring something to that magical place, someone to that magical place. So that was a great influence on me theatrically. And then I started playing guitar and wanted to get a girlfriend, so I started playing electrical guitar and playing in bands, and so there was a lot of pop music in my youth, and then I started, I went to the conservatory and I studied music recording also, and I had my own record label and recorded a lot of other composers, and all the way that period I was already composing since I started playing guitar really, and. So my musical DNA is very broad. So and you will hear that tonight as well. There's quite almost Renaissance type choir writing, but there's also almost abstract electronic music and almost poppy music and everything in between. So it's definitely one of my more kaleidoscopic scores. So yeah, in that sense, it feels like a very, very personal piece to me. It feels like I've sort of come home in a way, musically. Yeah.
How about visually?
Visually, it's a little bit harder to pinpoint where the influences are, but I love, directors like David Lynch or Atom Egoyan or visual arts, Anish Kapoor, Bill Viola. So I'm a real art omnivore. I love many things. It's yeah. I think you can maybe find snippets of that throughout the piece. Yeah.
Good questions. Yeah, I think we're there. Are we there? Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like the audience to
No,
know about the
I hope
work?
you like it.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.